Remember that cricket is a funny game. 100 years before we protected our head, players looked after their groins. So don't be as stupid as old cricketers. Protect your computer now. NordVPN is the protection I use when facing cyber shortballs or when rights issues try to dismiss me. Geo-block so you can watch all the cricket you want. Grab your NordVPN deal by going to nordvpn.com/Kimber.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 59 of the Footmarks podcast. I'm Behram Qazi, your host, who you can find at DefMango on Twitter. And with me, also everywhere and right next to me, is Jarrod Kimber. And the title for today is The Chasing Obsession in T20s.
Yes.
Now, 2013 was the last time, Jarrod, where teams won the toss and opted to bat more than chase. And 11 years on, we've seen that regardless of what the winning percentages of teams are, chasing or batting first, most teams just opt to chase first. It's been deeply ingrained into the philosophy. And I just want to ask you, does that surprise you?
No. I remember when I first started working in cricket when I would work with the team and there would be a breeze in one direction. And they'd be like, we have to hit every six over there. And I went, do you? Because that team's going to defend that boundary. Shouldn't you actually be looking at the other side that they're not defending and look for that? And so I know that once teams think that there's a thing, they kind of go all in with it. We know that 53% of the time when you bowl first, you win. If I was to say to you, I'll give you this coin and 53% of the time it's going to be heads, you would always call heads.
Basically.
The thing is that is not exactly how cricket works. And I think there's a disconnect between what the teams are trying to do and what they actually are doing.
And if we look at, the stats 20... Oh, what happened?
No, nothing. I'm just muting my computer.
Just cut this out of shit.
It's all right. We're vibing.
If we look at the stats 2015 onwards, Jarrod, there is a clear advantage for teams chasing in T20s. But it's not by an awful lot. It's a very minor advantage, but you take into account that teams prefer what they are chasing. Of course, teams aren't sure what a good total is. Batting first and setting totals is a bit of a challenge. Then you factor in, due. And the due factor does, encourage teams to chase more. So it's not like this strategy doesn't make any sense at all. It does.
No, we've been saying for a long time, haven't we, that, if you know what the total is, it allows you to bat in a certain way. Whereas if you don't and you're trying to set, you take risks and you do everything else. It's not as if there's no cricket logic to this and that there's no... I would say this came from analysts rather than players. But I think the reason the players have gone so all in on it is because they're backed up what the analysts have said, right?
Yeah.
And that's fine. We have no issue with that. But I was shocked when I looked at it and it was like 53% of the time you win batting second and 47% you win batting first. I'm like, well, that's not the advantage of what these teams are actually. These teams are going all in this thing that has a very small percentage on either side.
Yeah, 6% is still a considerable advantage.
It's not nothing, is it?
Yeah, it's not nothing, but it's not what we probably think it is or other teams do.
I know fans who would say things like, what's the point of even playing T20 cricket? Because the toss is the only thing that matters, right?
Yeah.
And I remember asking a fan one time, I said, what do you think the percentage is? And he goes, I think it's 70%. It's 53, right? So I think if you ask players, I don't think they would know it was 53%. I think you'd have a hard time convincing players if it was 53 to 47. Now, you and I have more of a maths background. As I said, to go back to the coin tossing analogy, like I get it. If it was just a coin, I'd be like, fine. Every time I will call heads because 53 times I will get a head and 47 times I will get a tail, right? That's what I'm expecting from that. And also, if you were to come to me as an analyst and go, can we get a 6% advantage over our opposition? Be like, well, here's one. Where it all falls down is that that's not how cricket is played. Yeah. And more importantly, if due was such a factor and chasing was so much easier than setting, wouldn't it be more than 53-47?
Absolutely.
So I think we're getting really excited over something that actually isn't that much part of it shouldn't be as much of the conversation as what we have.
I'll come to setting a total in the due factor later. Right now, I want to talk to you about 2022. Because this is a year in which teams actually won more games batting first, yet that had no impact on the decision-making at the toss. And that is bizarre.
I think that goes back to what I was saying about the wind, right? So teams have just convinced themselves that hitting with the wind makes sense. And it's like, yeah, like I get it. If you get a length ball and it's in your spot and you know that is the short boundary or the side you're hitting with the wind, you go through with it. If you get a really good ball, though, you shouldn't be trying to hit with the wind. You should still be playing it correctly. And you look at 2022, it's incredible to me that at no stage did anyone go, it's not working this year. Right?
Yeah.
And if they did, the teams just ignored them. So again, that shows to me that there's a mindlessness to it, right? Do you know what I mean? It's not being done from a position of we're trying to make the best decision. It's really being done from a position of we just do this.
And if you look at 2017, that is when this philosophy really went berserk. Teams, more than or roughly about 75% of the times, were opting to field first, but teams were still winning games 2016 onwards. Teams that batted first were winning games 47% of the time, as you mentioned. So there really is no correlation over here.
No, I mean, I would go this far because both of us know a little bit about maths. If teams really believe this, they should be doing 100% of the time.
Yeah.
And if they don't really believe it, why are they doing it like 35% of the time and then winning 53% of the time? There's a disconnect in either direction. Either you truly believe in it and you do it all the time, and of course there is a particular team we'll talk about later that does that, or you don't believe in it, and therefore you're just sort of wading in the water a little bit. So again, it seems to me like someone's told them it's a good idea, but they're not quite 100% sure what to do with it. And realistically, you should be checking every individual ground. You should be talking to, quite often you can ask the curator. The curator will say, look, Dew might come in.
Yeah.
The other thing we never talk about, by the way, Behram, it's not in the piece or the video, but I was thinking about this the other day. Sometimes Dew comes in the first innings.
That is interesting.
It doesn't always, do you know what I mean? We don't know what time the Dew is going to come in. And there are certain grounds where it probably comes in sometimes, earlier. And sometimes you'll see the team bowling at the death in the first innings will start to get the ball being due. So the point being is you need to know the ground, the opposition, your team. If you're just doing it automatically, it doesn't really follow for me.
You said the word automatically, and it's interesting how, 140 odd years of Test cricket that we've seen, most teams, unless the conditions are completely favoring bowling first, you see that in New Zealand quite often actually, where teams prefer to bowl first and the pitch flattens out as the Test match goes on. But the regular decision of the toss, or the more frequent one, is you bat first.
Yeah.
It's quite the opposite in T20 cricket, but almost as automatic, really. And that is a fascinating paradox.
Yeah, and I think that is the reason I brought that up, other than the fact that I thought it was interesting that they're different. But the reason I really brought it up is because I think there is an element. So in Australia, they always used to say, win the toss, think about what you're going to do, and then bat first. Right? And I remember being told that when I was a kid and just thinking, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
Right? Like there was like a disconnect there where you're just like, well, wait a minute. Why are we just automatically doing that? And I had a theory when I was a kid that actually almost every team I ever played against batted first, right? So I was like, well, why don't we just send every team in and then we'll be the league's best team at chasing. And we know that when we turn up to a game, what we're going to be able to do. And as you know, I've thought about a similar plan that you could do in T20 as well, based on the fact that, okay, if the opposition's just going to do something automatically, let's use it against them. So I do think that if you're not really thinking your decisions through, you can be game planned against a little bit.
If you look at all the decisions of the toss in all franchise and international cricket 2023 onwards, international teams are still opting to bat first every now and then, I think 1/3 of the time. But when you look at the franchise teams, it's not the same. They are opting to field first almost all the time. In fact, if you look at the CPL, teams opt to field first 85% of the time. So 15% of the time they're opting to bat first. But if you look at the results, teams are winning, at least teams who are batting first, they're winning 50% of their games. So it's quite ridiculous to me that despite these numbers, there's an obsession with chasing. They're convinced that we have to field first. And you see it more in franchise cricket as opposed to international cricket.
Yeah, I wonder if franchise teams end up being more level, if that makes sense. Whereas international teams, you probably have more complete mismatches. So you look at the odds in the IPL, right? I think the furthest I ever saw any team starting was maybe at 2-1, right? Whereas, obviously, we're just watching IPL. There were teams starting at 12-1 and 15-1. So there's more disparity in international cricket. And I wonder if it was that. And also in international cricket, you probably have more extreme kinds of teams, right? Because you might just have a team that's set up in one particular way. Whereas in franchise cricket, you probably have a few bowlers and a few batters and you're more in the middle. So I think all that makes sense. What doesn't make sense is deciding to win the toss and bowl first 85% of the time if you're winning 50% of the time.
Especially if you're playing in Guyana, I probably want to bat first.
And that goes back. That's why I think this is unthinking, right? And I think it's become a mantra of these teams, and they're not really thinking why they're making a decision. They're not checking to see if it's being done in the right way. They're not going through it in all these different directions. And I get it. It's easier to go with the flow if the flow is wrong than go against the flow. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's what's happening here.
Yeah, and if you look at international teams outside of the T20 World Cup, they're still opting to field first more. Now, that doesn't make sense to me. I'll throw in Pakistan over here. Take Pakistan, for example. They are a shit side when they're setting a total, and they're decent when they're chasing one. At least that's how it stands currently. And back in the day, at least a couple of years back, they were a really good chasing team. So bilateral T20s, they don't mean much. Right? T20 World Cups do. Who cares about rankings these days? The rankings are flawed as is, right? If you are an international team and you are trying to prepare for a T20 World Cup, why would you not opt to bat first every opportunity so that A, you can, become a better team at setting totals, especially if that is a deficiency of yours, which Pakistan is a culprit of. And they didn't do that, by the way. They always fielded first. And also, your bowlers could, at times, practice more or get better bowling with a dewy ball. So if only you would be looking at the T20 World Cup as, the be-all, end-all, which I think that's what international teams should do, why would you not prepare better by doing the opposite of what everyone is doing? Because other teams are going to send you in to bat, and you can bat first, and you can become a team, that's better at setting totals.
Yeah, and I think with Pakistan is a perfect example of, and I think Ireland was similar as well.
Yes.
Ireland had a similar kind of quirk in theirs. And it's like, okay, so you're going to the World Cup. You're not going to be able to control, let's say, 50% of the tosses.
Yeah.
Let's just assume 47% of the tosses. Anyway. And so you're going to the World Cup. Don't you want to make sure between the last World Cup and this World Cup that you either bat first and bat second 50% of the time for each, which I think is fair, or the other option is you go, we're really good at this. We don't need to get better at this. This is the thing we need to get better at. Let's just do this a bunch of times over and over again so we can work on this problem.
Yeah.
And instead, and this is where I think it's even more maddening in bilateral cricket. Bilateral cricket doesn't mean anything, as you just said.
Exactly.
So why not use it to prepare for the World Cup instead of just going, well, algorithmically, we're 6% more likely to win this game if we do this than we are if we do this. And it's like, that's great. It doesn't matter if you win this game. Yeah. It matters if you win important World Cup games. And to me, I don't think teams are putting themselves in the best chance for that. And I would go as far as the knockout games. The league games. Right. So some of these teams are doing the exact same thing. And you're like, well, when you get to the knockout games, again, you're not going to be able to predict whether you're going to win the toss or not. Have you got to that part in the season, making sure that both sides of your game are ready for the knockout games, especially towards the end? If you've already qualified, the last couple of games, you should be doing your weakness every time, not your strength.
And Pakistan is a perfect example because just now, when they went to Ireland, they lost the first game. And then they won the toss 2 other games, which they won, but they opted to field first. They were chasing totals. When they went to England, they did the same. And Joss Butler sent them in to bat first. Otherwise, that was not on the itinerary. It was not part of the plans. And they lost to the USA batting first. Right? So, irony is a bitch. But also, just coming back to setting totals and the due factor, right? If a team is only losing 53% of the times batting first, then are those two obstacles, due and setting totals, are they as big as we think they are?
They can't be, can they?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make sense, right?
My first thought, I can't remember if it was Cheyenne or Varun who did the stats on this one, but whoever did them, I remember having a chat and straight away going, am I missing something? This to me tells me that due doesn't play that big a factor in this game. Because even I didn't know, I thought it would have been, I knew I'd looked at it before, but the way that teams have been talking about it recently, I assumed it had changed again. So I thought it would have been more 55, 45, or even more extreme at times. And then you look at that and you think to yourself, there's probably a few key grounds in the world where due is a huge factor.
Yes.
Right? Consistently.
And there are a few grounds in the world where batting first is like obvious.
And that would be my other point. Right?
Yeah.
So and I know it's not easy, talking to the traders and everything. One thing the traders are always trying to work out is the Jew going to come in? Is it not going to come in? And so there's probably a lot of times when it's like the Jew might come in. So we're going to bowl first, right? Which is absolutely fine, except for the fact that if that is a pitch that is actually better to bat first on, you don't know if the Jew is going to come in, and you've already made a huge decision. My guess is one of the reasons we see the stats the way we do is that a lot of teams have gone, we'll bat first, and that's the day that the Jew comes in, and they get stung, and they'd rather not get stung by that. But I think what you and I would say is that clearly Jew doesn't come in as much as we think it does. And secondly, if it is coming in a lot, it's not affecting the games as much as they think it is. So I'd be very interested, and it's something that we can't really work out, but I'd be very interested to see now how often this is a huge deal or not, because I'm starting to think that Jew doesn't play anywhere near as big a role as they think it does.
If you make any content, Minvo Pro is the tool for you. Take your long format content and cut it and slice it for social media. This AI-inspired weapon will turn your one piece of work into so many clips. Try Minvo.pro now.
Yes, plus, in T20s, in most parts of the world, I'm not going to say all parts of the world, you do tend to get truer surfaces, right? There is, of course, the West Indies, and then, a few surfaces all surfaces in Bangladesh, right? I can name a few venues where that might not be the case, but generally T20 surfaces, people want runs. And there are a few anomalies. But if you look at 2016 onwards, and I'm talking international cricket now, right? Afghanistan are the only international side, who have opted to bat first more than 30% of the times. Now, given their squad composition and, whatever you saw in the recent T20 World Cup, you would know why they do that. It makes complete sense. But on the other end of the spectrum, you've got England. In this same period, 2016 onwards, Jarrod, they have opted to bat first like 6 or 7% of the times. From the start of 2017 to the end of 2021, they did not bat or opt to bat first once, which is ridiculous. And even that Guyana surface versus a team like India, where it was obvious that, this pitch will slow down, it'll get difficult to bat on as the game progresses. All of that information did not prompt Jos Buttler to opt to bat first. And this is a team, by the way, that in this period has won more than 50% of their games when they have opted to bat first. So make it make sense for me.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting thing I'm sure their win percentage is fantastic when they do the thing that they do all the time.
Yeah.
Because it's the thing that they do all the time, right? And I think they've got themselves into a feedback loop where they've convinced themselves that, look how many times we win when we bowl first. And it's like, for 5 years, you probably bowled first in like 75 to 80% of your games. Yeah. You got really good at that one thing, and it makes sense. The other interesting thing is that India is the other team who has who opts to bowl first almost automatically in the way that England does.
Yep.
Yet they got to Guyana and they made a cricket decision.
Yes, and Rohit Sharma said that had I won the toss, I would have batted first. They even batted first in the final. Worked all right.
So I think what that tells you is that there has to be a grey area here. And I think where England has gone wrong and where Pakistan has gone wrong and perhaps Ireland, and I would even go as far as Afghanistan from before. You're right, they do it more than other international teams.
But it's not an awful lot, right? It's still just over 30%.
Considering what we've just seen with their team, you would say that they should be doing it like 80% of the time, right? Like if they should be flipped to what England is. So I still think that I don't think there's enough thought process with all this sort of stuff at the moment. And it goes back to the automatic thing. But just on a purely on a cricket sense, individual game by game situation, it's possible that England didn't feel confident enough batting first because they don't bat first enough, right? It may not have been that. They may have just gone, no, we're the bowling first team. That's what we do.
I mean, you'd have to convince me a lot if I'm a part of that dressing room that, hey, chasing on a slow surface versus Kuldeep, Akshar and Jadeja is a better idea.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds completely bizarre.
Yeah. So, and the other thing that we looked at as well was that, especially on those sort of earlier games when the sun's still up, places like Australia and Pakistan and India where it's really, really hot. We know that if you have all 11 players out in the field, they are drained by the time they have to bat in the second innings, right? We're talking about 35-degree days, 100% humidity days in Sri Lanka and all those sorts of things. That doesn't seem to, again, be factored into anyone's planning, right? And you occasionally hear a captain at the IPL or the PSL or Big Bash mention that. But again, that is the secondary theory. The first theory is always the automatic one, and then the secondary. So you really, I think if you go to one of these grounds, you should have as much data as possible to say this is what usually happens. Is there any evidence that there is dew in previous games? If so, do we know roughly, perhaps, when it came in? That might be a tough one to work out. But what's the temperature now when the sun's out?
And also, when is the rain scheduled, right? England knew that. It was going to rain every now and then if we opt to bowl first. And they still did it anyway.
And that's wet, isn't it? Is that a different kind of?
I mean, that doesn't help your spinners.
I actually think in that game, that really, usually a rain break at that stage would have really helped England. Because the umpires would have taken them straight off. But because it was a light rain that went for a while, that really set England back at that point.
It was raining as Adil Rashid was bowling his first over.
Do you remember? And he was sliding the ball through because he couldn't, and he realized. So little things like that, you're just like, well, again, if you knew it was going to rain, that was a day game.
Yeah.
So there's no dew. So the time that there was most likely that ball to be wet was when England was bowling.
Exactly.
So you it's all these sorts of things that you look at them and you think to yourself, I just don't think you've put all this together.
Yeah, and it's surprising that a team which has so much, data analysis going on, it's backed up by data all through these years, ever since the 2015 World Cup, in which they went out.
And that's why they're doing this.
Yeah,
but they're not. I don't think they're putting enough data in.
I mean, they were the attacking champions. Now they're not. And Joss Butler did say he's not defending anything the last time we heard him in a presser in the ODI World Cup, right? So, well, that happened. Also, do you think that England's hell-bent nature of fielding first and the obsession they have with chasing has had some sort of a contributing effect towards the trend of making this strategy mainstream?
Yeah, I think they did so well with it. I mean, I know it was around before England, and it was a theory around 2013, 2014. I remember talking to some coaches about it, and they would say, "Oh, you always field first."
Yeah,
and I hadn't looked at the numbers at that stage, and I just sort of nodded along. But usually, what happens is you need an international team to change it. So West Indies didn't invent standing there and hitting 4s and 6s.
Yeah.
But what they did was they made it so that other countries would look at doing a similar thing, and I think England have done that with this. It is interesting to me that the two teams who I think probably are more analytically inclined, although India is a bit,
I mean, I couldn't understand the recent video that the Ashwin video that was going viral. It was in Tamil. But apparently, India also really, dug deep into the data in this particular World Cup.
And so it's interesting that they are still basing it on that. Whereas the more research I do on this, I go the other way. Look, there's a lot of analysts who disagree with me. And they're just like, 53 to 47, that's automatic, Jarrod. I'm like, yeah, but I don't think that's how you prepare a team.
It's like the matchups conversation.
It is a little bit. I think if you stop at the original conversation of matchups, that's where you go wrong. And I feel these teams are stopping at the original conversation about the toss.
I mean, if I were to play a day game in conditions which already favor spin bowling and are slow, you'd have to really give me some solid data for me to field first.
Yeah.
I would not be convinced easily. Yeah. And that's why I'm surprised that Joss Butler has gone that way.
And the only reason...
And he's defended it. He's ready to die on that hill, right?
And I think the only reason you would field first in a day game is if you can bowl in the morning and the ball's nipping around.
True.
We did see that a little bit in Dallas, right?
Yes.
But in St. Lucia, we saw the opposite. You could make runs in the first innings and it got harder and harder to bat as the innings went on.
Yes.
So I think you have to understand, again, it's just, I think what teams are doing... and that analogy of matchups is perfect. I think they're doing exactly what they did with matchups. It's very easy to say you should bowl off spin to left-handers. But when you start to look into the details, is this off-spinner good against left-handed? Is this left-hander good against off-spin?
Can this left-hander play spin at all?
Is there a short boundary on this? Do you know what I mean? On all those sorts of things. I think once you get to that point, you start to think to yourself, this is far more confusing. And I just, for someone who's worked with teams, I kind of think they're not getting to that level.
Yeah. In the recent T20 World Cup, if you look at the semi-finals, Afghanistan, a bat-first team, that's how they won all of their major games in this recent T20 World Cup. They opted to bat first in Trinidad, and that backfired. It did not work, and they got bowled out for 56. Whereas England, which is a bowl-first team, they opted to bowl first in Guyana, and they also lost. So the irony really wasn't lost over there, was it?
It's pretty funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
And realistically, you look at those two games, both teams should have done the exact opposite, right? Whether England beat India, I don't know. But certainly that was an issue. But with Afghanistan's case, their only chance of winning was probably bowling South Africa out for 75 or 80, which, to be fair, looking at that wicket and the way their seam had started on it, might have actually been a possibility as well. So, yeah, it's still, and I think that's the best way of putting it, it's still literally a coin toss, right?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, we don't know. And that Trinidad pitch, Darren Ganga went out and gave press the day before and said, I know there's lots of cracks here, but they're fixed. It's not going to cause any problems. This is going to be a really good wicket. I think he said it was a 160-run wicket.
Wow.
Did we have 100? We weren't going to get 160 runs if these teams batted for 60 overs.
Poor grassroots cricket kids who were supposed to get 10,000 hits on every 100 runs because there were none in that particular semi-final, right? Just in conclusion, can we say that the major takeaway over here is that this chase or field first or chasing strategy that we see in T20 cricket, it's rampant across international teams and the franchise T20 teams. It's been following or it is being followed en masse. Is it a bit of a hoax, even though the numbers do suggest there is a bit of a advantage? And obviously there are multiple ways to skin a cat.
Yeah.
But the way people have put all their eggs in the chasing basket, I mean, this is a bit stupid.
Yeah, I think if you're completely committed to the fact that it's 53%, right, and all your team is in, and you have a team that is better at chasing as well, I think do it 100% of the time, right?
Yeah.
Go do the England way. But then you have to be prepared for the fact that you will not have batted first very many games when you get to the knockouts, right? But if that's where you want to go with it, I just think that when it comes to, as I was saying before, the short boundary, the wind, matchups, as you said, these sorts of things. Remember the old 3 wickets in the first 6 overs thing?
Yeah.
And everyone was like, oh, that means we have to block. No, it doesn't.
Nope.
It actually means the opposite of that. That's why you're losing those games, because you lose 3 wickets and you slow down, right? And so I think it's an unthinking trend. And all I would be saying to teams at the moment is, let's just go through all the different games and why we're doing that. And we know where our next 5 games are. We can do all the research beforehand. Right? And then we can get there and we can add extra information and we make a choice. But let's make sure when we get to the next World Cup that we have batted 50% of the time in the first innings and 50% of the time in the second innings.
I can understand that argument for franchise teams, the chasing first argument, right? Because it's a long tournament and let's just, get as many or rack up as many wins as possible in the first half of it because there is a slight advantage and teams, obviously, they're feeling more confident chasing totals. And there's no doubt about the fact that bowling with a dewy ball is hard and setting a total can be complicated. You never really know how many runs you need to put up on the board. But in terms of international cricket, bilateral cricket, it makes no sense to me where teams opt to field first because those T20s don't mean anything. You're preparing for a T20 World Cup in which you have 2 years in between. And if you always bat first and the opposition always puts you into bat first, at least or at the minimum, at the end of this 2-year cycle, you would hopefully become a good bat first team and then you already know how to chase because all of your players are playing in these franchise tournaments.
I know.
It's right there.
And that goes back to my under 14 theory, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're going to be able to know about 80% of the time that you're going to bat first. You can become the anti-England.
Yes.
Where you become the best team with that. And again, I think again, it's also working out what kind of team you have. There are some of these sides where I think to myself, do you know what? They're not even thinking about the players they have, right? And how their team sets up. So look, I think there's many different options you can do. But I do believe that most casual fans, especially of T20 cricket, would be pretty shocked that it's only 53-47.
Yeah.
And that it's pretty level. And when it comes down to it, there really isn't that much of an advantage to batting second than there is batting first anyway. And the other interesting thing is whether that changes in the future.
Yes.
Now that we see teams with the ability to score 260, 270, 280, right? In the IPL, if nowhere else. But all leagues are getting quicker. Right across the board. If we get to that, I wonder if just the pressure of those chases becomes really different. Because remember when T20, between about 2014 and 2018, if you made over 200, the other team literally would slog and see how they went, and that was it. Now, how do you chase 280 in a T20 game? Like, if you get 3 dot balls in a row, you think you have to hit 2 sixes to catch up to it. Yep. So I just think the method of chasing will change. But it's also something that is, if there is going to be a consistent percentage where the bowling team wins more, doesn't cricket have to get involved here at a certain point, and the
Sure.
away team has to start making the decision on what they want to do.
I mean, we've wanted that in Test cricket for the longest time.
They did it in first-class cricket in England briefly. I think it's a brilliant system. I think, good luck doctoring the wicket there. Now, if you don't know who's going to use it first, right?
Yeah.
You make it a much riskier situation. So I think we might have to look at things like that. And the other question is I would have said that before writing this piece, that cricket needs to overcome the dew problem, right? And I now wonder if cricket actually has a dew problem.
That's interesting. Super Soppers. Have we been wasting our money on Super Soppers? Anyway, thank you for watching. If you made it till the end, thank you for watching this entire podcast.
If you didn't hear what he said, so it doesn't matter.
And yes, tell us what you think about this particular issue in the comments section below. Just a quick reminder to everybody, you guys can go to goodareas.co, which can be your one-stop shop for all the work that we do as part of this team, whether it be written content, podcasts, or videos. We'll be back with another episode of Footmarks next week in person. It'll be happening for a few weeks since I'm in England. But yeah, you guys have a good week and we'll see you next week with another episode. That's all for now. Goodbye.